You are listening to Proof Text, a Glossa House podcast exploring Scripture and all things related to it. New episodes are released daily. For more information, check out glossahouse.com and subscribe to our channels on Spotify and YouTube. Welcome and enjoy.
Hello and welcome to Proof Text and Glossa House TV. I am Dr. T. Michael W. Halcomb, and today I have the great privilege of talking with Dr. Matt Bianco. I hope did I say your last name right?
Yep.
Bianco? Yeah, awesome. And I'll go ahead and share with you folks that are watching a page that talks a little bit about him. Dr. Bianco is with Circe. Did I say that right? Circe? The Circe Institute. Yes, did I get it?
Yeah, you got it.
All right. So he's the COO for the Circe Institute, where he also serves as a head mentor in the Circe Apprenticeship Program, and I want to talk about that. A homeschooling father of three. He's graduated all three of his children, the eldest of whom graduated from St. John's College in Annapolis, Maryland, and his second and third from Belmont Abbey College in Charlotte. And you married your high school sweetheart, and all kinds of cool stuff here. You are the author of Letters to My Sons, A Humane Vision for Human Relationships. I definitely want to talk about that. You wrote your dissertation on Plato's Republic and education. And there's a whole bunch of stuff that you've written on the Circe Institute .org website. So lots to talk about here. Did I get all that right? Yeah. So I'm kind of just reading from that, but let's start. So you have tell us about the Circe Institute. I'm definitely eager for our viewers and listeners to be more up to speed on what y'all have going on.
Yeah. So the Circe Institute is a research and training institute for Christian classical education. We put together conferences and workshops, trainings, events, curriculum, stuff like that to just help classical schools or homeschooling parents that want to, teach in a Christian classical way and kind of, create training and resources, curriculum and stuff along those lines to help them do that. It's kind of the general gist of the Circe Institute. There's training stuff and our conferences and workshops and consulting, and then there's resources as far as books we publish and curriculum we publish, all of which is to try to help the homeschooling parent or the classical school teacher teach well.
Absolutely. So it says that you homeschooled your three children, and we're homeschooling one of our three right now, and I'm curious, what set you on the path to choosing to homeschool?
Yeah, so it's kind of, it's a little bit misleading to say that I homeschooled them.
Okay.
My wife homeschooled them.
All right.
Usually around 11th grade, I would become much more involved. Like they would start coming to me around 8th and 9th grade, and they wanted to ask me questions about stuff that was hard for them instead of mom, especially the boys. They wanted dad's right. Take on it. Even if mom's answer was the exact same answer as mine, they still wanted to hear mine, which drove my wife crazy, But yeah. I was like, honey, it's fine. You got like 13 years of them wanting you for everything. I'm going to get like 1 year, and then they're going to want other people, and friends, and their pastor, and whatever. So, let me have this. So yeah, somewhere around like 8th, 9th grade, they would start coming to me for stuff a little bit more frequently. But she still did the bulk of the homeschooling. And then in 11th grade, I would start doing some more of the teaching. 11th and 12th grade, I did more of the teaching. It would depend on the child and also what my job was at the time. But the journey started really back when my oldest was in 3rd grade. We had been going to a church for about 2 years where in California, of all places, where most of the church homeschooled, and we were one of the few families that didn't. And there was and we were young Christians too at the time. Like we we got baptized, I think maybe 6 months before we moved there. So we were Christians for about a year and a half, 2.5 years, 1.5 to 2.5 years at that point. And I just immediately kind of accepted that Christians should take control of the education of their children. My wife was not as convinced immediately and thought maybe I was just wanting to do it because everybody else in the church was doing it. And that last year that we were there, when my oldest went into 3rd grade, I was in the military at the time. So I was in California, and they were going to start the school year in California. Then in November, I was going to be transferred to Texas, and they were going to be in Texas schools. And then in February, I was going to finish up my follow-up training in Texas, and we were going to go to Maryland. So they were going to be in 3 different schools in 3 different states in 1 year. And so that year, my wife agreed to homeschool them just to prevent that kind of weird, bouncing around. A lot
of transition. Yeah,
all that transition. And I took that as this is the beginning of our homeschooling journey, and we're just going to homeschool. And this was the mechanism or the means by which it happened. But my wife, who wisely didn't tell me this, she thought in her mind, well, I'm going to homeschool them for this 1 year, and then once we're settled in Maryland, I'm going to put them in the schools there. But at the end of that first year, the way my wife says it when she's being funny, she says, at the end of that first year, I realized I actually liked my children and I wanted to be around them. So, so we kept homeschooling them, and the middle one was starting 3rd grade. The oldest was starting 3rd grade that year. The middle child was starting kindergarten, and the youngest was a couple years out from school. So basically, we homeschooled our oldest from 3rd to the end to graduation, and then the other one partway through kindergarten to the end, and the youngest one the whole time, all right up to the end. And
wow, excellent. So, what as you've like gone on the homeschooling journey, I'm wondering what sort of trends you've seen outside of the homeschooling journey, like in the public school system or otherwise, that maybe have reinforced the decision, this was the right thing to do. I loved what you said earlier about the Christian parents sort of take control of their children's education. And so you're doing that. As you're doing that, is that being reinforced by what you're seeing going on, outside of homeschooling?
Yeah, I mean, on the face of it, it's like pretty clear at this point. Of course, the clarity came especially after our kids had graduated, because my youngest graduated in 2022, I think. And the craziest stuff seems to be happening in the last 3 to 4 years.
Yeah.
But there's always some kind of craziness going on all the time. It just seems like it escalated very, very quickly.
Yes.
And I remember a time when the question was, well, if you homeschool your children, how are they going to be socialized?
Right.
And now it's like it's almost a given that you homeschool your children so that they don't get socialized, because the way they're getting socialized is just insane. And it's completely flipped on it. Just the way things keep going culturally. So it, in a sad way, really, like the whole thing's been has been reinforced.
Yeah.
But it's not all. It's not like it's not a perfect cure, right? Because
exactly.
I'm proud of my kids, and I'm really happy with the way they've turned out and their walk with the Lord, and those things. But thank God, right? I don't know that I did anything. I mean, when I was younger, I thought I'm doing something here that's going to make sure my kids turn out okay and that they walk with the Lord. And now that I'm
Yeah.
older, it's like, no, yeah, God did that. Like,
Hmm.
in spite of me, maybe through me, but you know. But what I really mean that it's not really a cure is because, or a perfect cure, is because it's not. They still get influenced by the world around them. They still get influenced by the culture. Like it's just not. There's no way to completely protect them from it, and I'm not sure it's really wise to either.
Yeah.
So sometimes my kids say and do things that I'm just kind of what that's what why are you saying that? And it's kind of weird, and it feels to me like I'm a grumpy old man now. I wear reading glasses, and
My kids have started saying that about me too.
I go to bed early. I want to eat dinner at like before the sun goes down. All the old man stereotypes up there, and so like I think of it as, oh, my kid's talking like that because of the culture. They think that I'm weirded out by it because I'm just too old to get it. So I don't know. It's
Hmm.
and there's plenty of kids that not just my own, but in all of the work that I do at Circe, like I do all kinds of training stuff with homeschooling communities, homeschooling parents. In addition to the schools, classical schools, a big chunk of the audience that we serve is still homeschooling parents, and if not the majority, a lot of them. And so I work with them a lot and frequently, and I still hear the stories about what's happening with children, and they, they even being homeschooled or being put into a Christian school, they still face the same temptations and struggles that the
Absolutely.
rest of the world is. And maybe it's a difference of degree instead of kind. Like it's not as bad, but it's still there. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. Our other two, so we got one at home, and then the other two are in a Christian academy. And yeah, certainly you have kids there who aren't from believing families, who aren't believers, and they see that, so they certainly encounter some of that, and kids who have none of the ethics or morals really that believers would have or are supposed to have. And so uh yeah, I don't think the Christian schools and academies are immune to that. But I was reading some of your stuff. You did your PhD at Faulkner University, yeah? In their Great Books program. That I've noticed over the last, I don't know, maybe a decade and a half, the sort of Great Books movement has really become a thing. Maybe it's longer than that, but that's for the last decade and a half. I've noticed that sort of really coming into view. Um, and so tell us a little bit about that for people who may not be aware of what a Great Books program is. Um, Tell us a little bit about that. I think it's pretty fascinating.
Yeah, yeah. It's. The basic idea behind it is that there are great books going all the way back to the kind of the beginning of civilization, and those great books have, like, we still have them today because of how the sizable impact they had on the culture that they brought up, that they came out in, and the cultures that followed that. And that we are where we are, we 21st century United States or Western civilization or whatever, we are where we are because of that kind of conversation that began in whatever 2000 BC or something and through to now. um, and that and so the best way to understand reality as a whole, I think, but also the best way to understand the world that we live in is is to connect ourselves to that conversation that got us here, which comes through the great books. And so there's an Encyclopedia Britannica set, I think, that was published, a set that was published by the Encyclopedia Britannica, but it was made by the general editor was Mortimer Adler in the early to mid 20th century, where he identified like the most important books, and then that Encyclopedia Britannica set is called the Great Book Set. So sometimes people, when they say the great books, they mean that. And sometimes when they say the great books, they just mean any of these important books through history. Most of which, or many of which, are in his set, but not all of them. In fact, there's this huge gap between, the writings of St. Augustine and Thomas Aquinas, like in his set. Like there's hardly anything in there, or there is nothing in there. But anyhow, the great books, generally speaking, are things like Homer's Iliad and Odyssey, Virgil's Aeneid, the writings of Plato, Aristotle, and then the Bible it's not a part of the great book set, but he includes it in all of his prefatory and kind of appendix type material. But the Bible would be a part of that. The writings of a lot of the church fathers, like St. Augustine, Thomas Aquinas, and then up into when you get to the kind of the more Enlightenment kind of thinkers and philosophers and stuff, and Freud's going to be in there, and Darwin's going to be in there, and stuff like that. But just because of the impact they had, right. So it's typically a great books education is whether it's secondary school or undergrad, graduate school or postgrad, whatever. It's going to be including like most of the curricular content is going to be from those kinds of books. So you're reading kind of original source documents, sort of thing, is what they usually mean by that. If you hear great books, this is a great book school, that's usually what they mean. They're reading Homer, Virgil, the Bible, Augustine, Aquinas, whatever.
So you did a dissertation on some of that ancient literature yourself, Plato's Republic and Education. Talk a little bit about that.
So Plato wrote these dialogues that are about his teacher, Socrates. And, most people know of Socrates, at least by name, probably know that he's the guy that was always asking questions. And the particular dialogue, the Republic, is a conversation about justice. What is justice? And he uses a city as an example. But in the dialogue, he says he's trying to understand what justice looks like in the human soul, but the human soul is invisible to us. So let's use a city, because a city is analogous to the human soul. So if we see how justice works in the city, we can see how justice works in the human soul. Ever since he wrote that, scholars have argued about whether he's describing justice in the city or justice in the soul. Well, it's not either or. He's doing both of those things, right? But his main goal is to find justice in the soul, I would argue. But there would be people who disagree with me on that. And a big chunk of the book is describing how to educate the soul to be just, and how to educate the members of the city to be just.
Right.
And so that's what my dissertation was on. Like, how do you formulate an education that will help human beings will help make fertile the soil for the seeds of justice, as it were, to grow properly.
So you've also written Letters to My Sons, a humane vision for human relationships. What's the genesis of that project?
So, at some point my boys were teenagers, and they were probably on the older end of me realizing, hey, I should have a conversation with them about the birds and the bees. And it was a point where I realized it's probably late. Like I should have done this a few years ago. And so then I had the conversation with them at a time when it was probably even more awkward because of their age. And it was like one of those conversations that was, awkward, but also kind of dissatisfying. Like most of it was like, yeah, I know, Dad. Whereas I wanted to like kind of flesh things out, but not in graphic detail, but in like, what is humane about this, right? And they did not really want to have that conversation. So I thought I'll just write them a bunch of letters that they can read. And so I left. I went out of town for a week, locked myself in a room in like a condo. I borrowed some friend's condo, locked myself in a room it was about a week and a half. And I just wrote all these letters to them and tried to cover everything I could possibly think of when it came to human relationships. Like, how do you treat women and how do you treat other people? And, what kind of expectations should you have? And how should you treat yourself when you're alone in the dark and, whatever. And, how do you fit into human relationships in this world in a way that's honoring to who you are and to who the other person is. Because one of the things that always frustrated me was like, it seems like sometimes when we think about it, it's always like, well, if you do that thing, like lust after that woman or, do whatever, there's this, we can reduce it to this idea that, well, there's a law of God that you just broke and now you have to be punished, or, there's some sort of punishment that comes with that. And it's kind of it's not true. It's just, it's this, it's the law exists for a reason. Like, right. I don't want to reduce the teaching to the law because it works. I want to bring the law up because God gave us that rule for a reason. And so I wanted to talk about it from that perspective. But then once you get it to that perspective, there's this idea that, well, there's a victim. And the victim, in our society, the victim can almost never be yourself because you're a willing participant. So you can't do something harmful to yourself if you're doing it willingly. That's not 100% true, but it's kind of like the general thing. Like if you think about the whole, what do you call it? The thing where people, when they're old and sick and they just want to take medicine to die, the euthanasia thing, right?
Yeah.
Like I'm not doing anything harmful to myself because I'm willingly doing it. Like there's that kind of mentality. So then the victim is almost always the other person. And if I'm lusting after another person, but that person doesn't know, that I'm not really creating a victim. So I'm trying to describe it in a way where it's like the kind of mental hoops a teenage boy might jump through to justify his thoughts and his behavior, right?
Right.
And so what I wanted to do was show, okay, look, there is a law, but we're not obeying the law for the sake of the law. We're obeying the law because the law is pointing us to something about ourselves. And then show them that there's a harm that's being done to the other person and to themselves. And that when I do something like this, I'm affecting my own soul in as much as I'm also affecting the soul or the physical person of physicality of the other person, So the collection of letters was trying to work all of that out in all these different scenarios that teenage boys encounter.
Did the boys read the book, or did they read the letters?
They did, yeah.
Yeah. What was the response? I mean, did it generate some good discussion? What sort of response did the boys have?
No, it didn't really generate discussion. It was still more of a like, okay, but I don't want to talk about this. I'm maybe a little bit, but and probably more now. Like now that they're in their mid to late 20s, it's way more. We have more conversations like this now.
Yeah.
Although we don't at this point, we're not like referring back to the book anymore. We're just kind of talking about the ideas. But it was more like my middle son said, "Oh, that was way less." How did he put it? That was way less awkward than I thought it was going to be. So that was a good book, Dad. But good book for him was not awkward. A not awkward book was a good book for him.
Right.
So yeah.
Interesting. So you write a lot too, with the Circe Institute on their website. You have quite a number of articles on there, all of which seem pretty interesting. So you had a small series on there. It's a 2-part series, from snowflakes to snow castles, and rescued by Socrates, against sports ball, the tyrannizing image, all sorts of good stuff on the incarnation, the Socratic dialogue. And a lot of this still is sort of your seems like your ruminations on education and virtue, and the good and these sorts of things, the great books. I'm wondering, in the current sort of educational climate, what kind of responses are you getting on sort of these essays or posts, and as you guys go and do your conferences, what are you hearing from parents, more and more? What are you hearing from educators? What are you hearing from students these days?
Yeah, good question. The I think probably if I could try to think of a response that kind of covers, like it's not a specific response to a particular article, but kind of the kinds of responses that I get across several articles or teachings or talks that I've done. The main kind of response seems to be something like we don't really know how human beings tick. Like in a weird way, and I don't mean to say this and connect it to the current cultural crisis, but in a weird way, I think a lot of people feel like they don't know what a man is, and they don't know what a woman is, or they don't know what a human is.
Right.
And the so kind of the response is something along the lines of the like that article or that book or that talk or that presentation, or the way you're talking about this author, or the way you're talking about classical education, or the way you're talking about Christian education, is like revealing things to me about the way human beings work that I didn't have words for. And it's like it's something that where it's like it's new to them, but it feels like it's something they've always known or always should have known, So,
right.
like, I remember when I first read Plato, way before I was working on my dissertation. When I first read Plato, he has this idea in the book, in the Republic, and in a lot of his dialogues, where he talks about this idea that like human beings kind of have three things that they're after, categories of things that they're after. Like one of them he calls the appetites. Like I just want to be comfortable. I want food, drink, sleep, warmth, clothing, sex, some physical comforts. And usually I want money because money makes sure that I have the physical comfort. It's the means to getting physical comfort. So it kind of gets embodied in or stereotyped as like the desire for money. And then the other thing that I want, which is he calls kind of the passionate, or the insensitive is one of the translations of the word that he uses. Part of man, this part of the soul, is like I have a desire for honor. I want to be honored. and which might mean I want power, I want glory, I want honor, or something like that. And then the third thing a human being wants, is wisdom, knowledge. He wants to know things. He wants to be able to get all the jokes, as my boss Andrew Kern likes to say. And what Plato pointed out to me in his dialogues was that untrained and uneducated, most human beings will become a slave to their appetites, a slave to that desire for physical comforts. Some human beings will become a slave to that desire for honor, which can manifest itself as craving for power, and when you don't have it, you respond with anger, and then almost nobody desires wisdom unless they're trained to desire wisdom. But what he points out is that you can't, even if you have a desire for wisdom, you can't actually pursue wisdom unless you also learn to control your appetites and your passions, because they're too strong. Your appetites are too strong and too powerful. And in the end, your appetite, you won't even know this is happening, but your appetites will enslave your mind, so that your mind, in thinking it's being wise and clever, is actually being used to come up with plans for how to get the comforts that it wants. And when I realized that, most of the problems that I had in my personal life, where it's why do I do that which I do not want to do, and why do I not do that which I want to do? To steal the language straight from Paul in Romans 7, right? Came down to this idea, right, that I had not learned to subject my appetites and my passions. I gave into them, and now I'm trying to train my mind, and my mind is just at war. And the mind can't win by itself. Plato says that. C.S. Lewis says that in The Abolition of Man. The mind is not strong enough by itself to overcome the appetites and the passions. So it needs help. And when I learned that, I was I remember thinking, that's the only thing I wished I had learned as a kid. If I had learned that when I was 10 or 12 or 13, right, then my life could look so much different today. Obviously it wasn't the way things worked out, but it was that thing, that knowing that man works that way. And I believe that Plato's right. And you can see that same language being echoed in scripture, it's the letter to the Philippians, where Paul says their God was their belly. That section right there, he uses the same language of appetites, passions, and the mind. And their God is their belly, is the appetites part. And so you see it in Plato, you see it in scripture, you see it in the church fathers after that, St. Augustine, and all these people. And then somewhere around the Enlightenment, we just lose it all. And I remember thinking, if I knew that, I would be a much better educated person and have self-control. And so, and it seems like that's the kind of thing I get, the feedback I get from people, is that they're seeing those kinds of things, and it's helping them to understand human behavior, human action so much better in the role of education.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that. And as you talking, I did a when I was doing my master's of divinity, I did a full semester long course on Plato. We just read through big brick of a volume, a 1 volume complete works or something. That was a really, really fascinating experience to go through that. And there's it seemed to me a lot of crossover between things that Plato's saying and that Paul's saying. For example, you're picking up on some of the things, even just as you're talking about your dissertation, the idea of the body politic, and of course Paul talks about that sort of thing, uses the same analogy in First Corinthians, and our in our classical movements, it seems that to me that there's much more of an openness one, to reading that kind of literature, but two, to discussing these kinds of ideas that you're talking about. I went through a public school system, K through 12. I don't ever remember reading anything from, say, Plato. Certainly we didn't read anything from Paul, and I don't remember having conversations centering around the good, the true, the beautiful, the transcendentals, or virtue, or these sorts of things. I kind of remember just a very utilitarian kind of approach to academics in K through 12. But having worked in the classical Christian movement for a while and have my kids in that for quite a number of years, it seemed there was much more of an openness to discussing great books, or discussing the transcendentals, or discussing virtues. And so as you think about as you folks at Circe Institute, and just you in general are helping to promote homeschooling and promote classical education. I'm curious just about what would be your sort of elevator pitch, if you would, to maybe have someone consider looking that direction if they never have.
The elevator pitch question is the worst question ever.
Well, don't do elevator pitch. Let's just do, what would you say to have somebody? I liked before you said good question. Now I got worse question.
Yeah.
I love the honesty. It's the first interview I've had where I've had somebody tell me that's a terrible question.
It's just such a hard question. Like, how do I do this thing that is so big and so important to me in my whole life, and boil it down to this elevator?
Yeah, I get it. It's like the whole, you got 140 characters, go, right?
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Yeah, I get it. So let's just hear, what would your just encouragement, your not elevator pitch, but just your pitch be to look this direction? Like, look, just, at least give it a glance,
Yeah. And I think, I don't know, because I think it would depend to some extent. It depends on the person I'm talking to. Like sometimes when you're talking to a person, they give you some sort of hook to grab onto, right? Where like you're talking to somebody and they admit that they like reading Shakespeare, or they like whatever, Harry Potter, or whatever it is. They give you something that you can kind of latch onto, right, and kind of connect it back to this world. But Christianity is a big easy hook, I think, even though Christians don't always see the connection. One of there's I think it's online, but there's this article called the article's called "Is Classical Education Still Possible Today?" It's by this guy named David. But in that article, he describes what he calls the 4 pillars of classical education. And one of those pillars is important. One of those pillars is that in classical education, like in the classical world, when they were doing this, this is pre-Christ, like this is Aristotle, Plato, Socrates. They believed in this particular pillar, which is that the world, the cosmos, is both supernatural and natural, spiritual and physical, immaterial and material, whatever word you want to use, right? And that classical education is, because it's classical education, is an education in the whole person, and the whole person is both physical and spiritual. and it's an education in reality, and reality is both physical and spiritual. You have to have this pillar in order to do classical education.
Right.
Well, the world we live in does not have that pillar at
Right.
all. Like
Right.
even Christians who do believe in a spiritual reality, we believe in God, we believe in angels, we believe in heaven. We don't connect those beliefs into our world in a way that like the early church did, or in the way the ancients did. So what we do is we kind of live our whole lives every day as materialists, but then we pray before meals or before bed or when we get up in the morning, and we pray if we find out somebody's sick, and we go to church on Sundays, whatever those things are, right? We do our spiritual things, but it's almost like we're kind of pausing, doing that, and then unpausing and going back into our materialism. And on a day-to-day basis, most people today, even Christians, live like materialists. So when it comes to Christians, I think the big hook there, right, is classical education is an education that honors and it acknowledges and it demands acknowledgement of the fact that our world and we are both physical and spiritual. And if I want to learn how to live my life where I see the world and myself as both physical and spiritual, classical education will help me to do that. It'll help me to make my Christianity bigger and better. Really, I mean, like expand it to all parts of life, all parts of reality, in ways that it might not be right now. And I don't even know that it's happened. I don't even know that I'm living like a materialist. Like it's so,
Right.
I'm just swimming in these waters like the fish, right? Or whatever, it's the air that I breathe. I don't even know when I'm being a materialist because it's so normal to be a materialist today. And classical education can help me to like start seeing the cracks in materialism,
Mm.
recognize, like, for example, when it comes to education, the materialist says, education is to make these children good workers in society, right? Like get a good job and get a good pay, buy a nice house and live in a good neighborhood, live in a good school district, blah, blah, blah. And classical education says, no, education is to make our children wise about spiritual realities and virtuous towards spiritual things. Right?
I think that was probably 4 or 5 elevator trips. No, I'm
Yeah,
just
we just
kidding.
go up and down, up and down.
No, I used to tell my children pretty frequently, grades, like they aren't, that's not the like main thing for your mom and I. Like, we want you to work hard and we want you to invest in your studies, but like what we want really more than anything is that you become good men and good women, right?
Right,
Like that at the end of this, after you've lived with us for your 18 years and done your schooling, that you're a virtuous man or a virtuous woman,
right,
right? That you are good, and that your school should be, a large part of that. So are you doing your schoolwork ethically? Are you, like, these sorts of things? And um, the idea of the integration of God, you know, um, I when I look around the like at just about anything, I can, you know, I can draw an analogy for God, or I can, see, oh, I see how that points to God, or how this reveals God. And, fingerprints and activities of God are all over the place, right? If we just have the eyes to see it, the ears to hear it, it's like,
right,
um, and that the sort of veil has been lifted. We can see God every. It's like, when you go on a when you go on a website and um, there you get all these sort of like pop-ups that start happening, and I've realized that as a as a believer, that when I look around the world, it's almost as if like God has just constantly got these pop-ups, right? Like going all over the place, like, oh, this
Mm.
blade of grass, it's pointing up to me, the tree's pointing up to me. Like, you can look at virtually anyone or anything or any circumstance, and you can discern God from that.
Yeah.
It's just like constant pop-ups. And I think, the openness of classical education to that is absolutely an incredible part of the pitch. It at least look this direction, or for homeschooling, look this direction, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I kind of just going on a tangent there, but I appreciate you sharing that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's right. Like I started a Substack several months ago, and I wrote an article on there about this. Um, and and one of the arguments I was bold enough to make in that article, but I don't know if I don't know if I've convinced myself even, is that it was a response to this other article, is classical education is still possible? But I kind of flipped it and I said, look, is Christian education still possible? Like if I'm doing Christian education, but everything that I'm doing is basically modern education and in a materialist way, and I'm just kind of like reminding the students along the way that God is there. Like, let's study this. Let's study the solar system. By the way, God created it. If it's, I mean, it's, I don't think science textbooks, Christian science textbooks are that bad, but to the extent that they are, or that it feels like that to the kids, then I'm not really doing Christian education. I'm doing modern education with like a Christian kind of facade on it. And in classical education, because it forces that pillar into the midst of it, it forces us that is classical education still possible. Part 1 is what the article was called. Sorry, but classical education, I think, because of these pillars, and that one pillar in particular, kind of opens up education so that it's more Christian. It's more of a Christian education when you point to the classical world and say all of these things they're saying about the spiritual realm and about their gods are basically true. They just got the God wrong. Like Paul says, on Mars Hill, right? The altar to the unknown God. Let me tell you who that is. You're like, I know who that is. And it's easier to Christianize classical education because of that than it is to Christianize modern education, because modern education rejects these pillars, because modern education is so materialist. It's almost impossible to Christianize it. And adding prayers and creation classes and reminders about God is I'm not sure it's going to do enough of a job to make it Christian.
Well, man, it's good to meet you and to sort of step into your world, and hopefully folks who are watching or listening can check out your Substack, subscribe to that, and the Circe Institute. And do you guys have any conferences coming up soon, or
we have a big conference in Charleston in July. It's sold out. So,
Okay. What is that?
It's our national conference. We do it every year. It's often in Charleston, South Carolina, but it moves around sometimes. Did I say West Virginia a second ago? I don't know. But anyways, Charleston, South Carolina. And this year we always call it a contemplation of something. This year it's a contemplation of prudence. And so all the speakers will be speaking something along those lines, trying to dig out what prudence is in the classical tradition and the Christian tradition and modern understanding, application of it, all kinds of stuff like that. And it's very popular. It sells out every year on the day ticket sales open, which is October 1st every year. It always sells out on October 1st, almost always within the first hour or two. We do have a pre-conference there. So if you're in South Carolina, local-ish, we have a pre-conference on the Wednesday before the conference. That's not sold out. You can come do like a one-day a one-day thing with us, which would be great. The next conference is in October. It's not online yet. We don't have it posted. We don't even have a theme for it yet. And I don't know the exact dates, but it'll be one of the weekends in October, probably the second or third weekend. And that one is in McKinney, Texas, which is a suburb of Dallas. So anybody in that kind of tech, well, I know Texas is gigantic, but basically in Texas or Oklahoma, Arkansas area, that's a 2-day conference, and those are pretty popular. And they're a little bit more, they're smaller, about half the size of the national conference or a third of the size of the national conference. So you get a lot of more FaceTime with speakers and with other people, stuff like that. So those are pretty good. Those are probably the next 2 things coming up.
Well, excellent. We want, if you're watching or listening, check out the circeinstitute.org website, and they got these upcoming conferences, a lot going on there. Check out Dr. Bianco's Substack, and he's got a bunch of articles on the circeinstitute.org site as well. And lots of great stuff there. Check out closehouse.com, the Proof Tech podcast, and the Closehouse TV YouTube channel. Matt, it's great to meet you, brother, and thanks so much for carving this time out. I'm excited to share this with our folks, our demographic, and hopefully it'll get more people looking your way and interested if they're not already. So it's good to meet you, brother.
You too. Appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Blessings to you and your family. Go ahead.
Except that one. All good questions. Thanks.
I love it. Oh man. Well, blessings to you and your family and your ministries and these sorts of things. Thanks to everybody for watching and listening. We're going to stop there and say we hope that helps.
Interested in growing your ancient language skills but not sure where to start? Closehouse can help. From illustrated readers and short stories to lexicons and grammars, Closehouse offers a variety of resources for beginning, intermediate, and experienced ancient language learners. Head to closehouse.com today. Closehouse, language resources for the global community.